speaker pods. We're going to do it in that order because if I put my amp in, we're going to have a lot harder time getting to the fasteners. So I'm going to take this vent off using T25 torque sticks. That's going to give us a little bit better access to get to these torques, these Allen head screws that we have to get to without possibly damaging or messing up these gauges. So first I'm going to unplug the gauge and get my wiring out of the way. This one inner one is probably the harder one to get to, but once you get it loose, you can use your fingers and spin it the rest of the way out. There's just two, that's a smaller size Allen. Looks like we're using a 5/32 to take these out. We're using a 3/16 Allen head just to remove these perimeter screws from the pod. We'll take the pod off and we'll change the speaker sitting over here on our table. Alright, so I went and got an 11mm wrench, same thing as a 7/16. To get the two of the harder to get two bolts on the inside. Alright, we got our third bolt out. Time to take the pod off. What we've got left is to unplug the factory speaker harness. So we'll get them unplugged here. So we spoke a little bit in some other videos we've done about the fact that Hertz decided to use a Neo speaker to keep from gaining a lot of weight. You'll see this Neo speaker, this is a Neo magnet, but it is so small you can't even tell what part's the magnet and what part's the former. What I really like is these were developed specifically for Harley. So we have a speaker that has the same size mounting hole and we have the same size terminals. But see how much larger, even it being a Neo magnet, this is a lot larger magnet than the factory one. Another thing to look at is look at the size of this cone. They call this a 6.5. That's not even a 5-inch speaker, and look at the size of our 6.5-inch replacement. We have a lot more cone area, so we're gonna get a lot more volume out of it. We've got a lot bigger tweeter. Let's get it in, and in a little while we'll see how big a difference it makes in the sound. So we're gonna take the larger one with the stripe on it. It's gonna be our negative. Slightly smaller terminal fits our positive perfect. Let's make sure it's all the way on. I have to squeeze that a little tighter too. We want a good connection. We don't want to have to take this back apart later. I always like to start the screws and then tighten them up. And this is plastic, so don't over torque. Don't want to strip them out, but here we go. Much better looking speaker, a lot bigger driver. It's gonna be a big difference. I'm just starting each of them again. We've got a lot to line up on this frame bracket here in the center, so I'm not gonna tighten them until we get all those started. Tighten these that we left loose. Last but not least, don't forget to plug your speaker back in. Reattach all the harnesses that you've taken loose. I'm using a Hertz Power Sports HMP4D. It's a 600 watt amp. I'm gonna go ahead and wire it in hopes that later Tall lets us do his rear speakers. I'm gonna wire it up as a 4-channel amplifier. So if we turned on our rear out on our radios, we'll be feeding the signal into the amp, and all we'll have to do later is tie to our backbone harness and run it to the rear, add those rear speakers on. All right, so I'm gonna take this amplifier, and to install it, I'm just gonna clean the back of it, and I'm gonna apply a very large piece of industrial Velcro. Make sure if you do this, if you use Velcro or any other kind of two-way adhesive, that you always clean both the amplifier and the plate where it's going. All right, so I've pre-cleaned this surface with our alcohol just so we have a good place to stick the amp. The amp's just gonna set on this plate right above the radio. It's gonna give us good access to set our gains later. right, our amp is on. Now let's get to doing the wiring. Now our amp has RCA inputs. They have these protective marine covers. Always cut them off. I'm going to heat shrink over this to make sure they don't come unplugged and make sure that water doesn't come in and corrode our connections. With our pre-made harness, we already have RCA connections that we've applied for our input side of our amp. I know this looks long, but we're going to get all this tucked in and zip tied up and out of the way. So we have our front. Our front's going to be signified with our white and gray connectors, and rear input to the amp are going to be the green and the purple. So white is going to go to the white on the front side, gray to the red. And then on the back side, we're going to go green to the white, and purple to the red. That's going to keep our left and right correct and our front and rear fade correct. So let me get some heat shrink tubing applied to this. I'm going to wrap this part up into Tessa tape, and then we'll pick back up where we're wiring in our output side of our speaker wires. All right, so I've cut down the length of the output wires of the amplifier. I've stripped them back. I've prepped those to have our non-insulated crimp terminal installed. I also took the other end of our harness. I cut it a little shorter so we don't have so much wire to try to hide in here. I've already stripped it, crimped it, put heat shrink tubing on. So now all I'm going to do is match these colors up. This is EIE color coded, so it's the same color on both harnesses. Each one of these are going to get crimped into place. Then I'm going to heat shrink those connections and we'll wrap it up with Tessa tape. All right, so all 8 of those connections are crimped. I'll position the heat shrink tubing. Just want to cover each one of those connectors evenly. Try to get the same amount of tube on both sides. So this is going to insulate our connectors so we don't have any shorts, but at the same time it's going to make them watertight so we don't have any future corrosion. Whether you crimp or solder, you always want to heat shrink it at the end. Then we'll wrap it back up with this Tessa tape. This is the exterior grade Tessa tape. This is the same exact tape that's used on all the factory harness. This tape is very anti-abrasive, so if we have some vibration and a wire is rubbing against something, we don't have to worry about it rubbing through, causing a future short. So at this point we have our input side of our wiring is connected, heat shrunk, Tessa taped. We've also took the output side of our amp and it's connected back to the factory speakers through our T-harness. We're even wired for rear speakers, so later, if Tall wants rears, we're simply going to plug into this harness, run it to the back, and put some lids on it. Next step, I'm going to pull the gas tank and we're going to run our power wire and our ground wire from our battery up to our amp. All right, so we're going to remove 4 13mm bolts, 2 from the front of the gas tank, 2 from the back. Disconnect our fuel sending unit, our vent for our gas tank, and our return line, and then we're going to disconnect our fuel line. We're doing that so we can take the gas tank off to run our power and ground up this backbone of the bike to do this the right way. Let's start taking it apart. Unplug the return, follow this electrical connector back and unplug it. It goes to the fuel sending unit. Then we have this gas tank vent and just runs down the side of the frame. A couple zip ties holding it in place as well. Alright, and last but not least, we've got a quick disconnect fuel line on these Harleys to make this very easy. All right, so we've got our gas tank off. We're going to remove this cover. This runs right down the backbone of the bike. This is where we're going to run our power and ground. Once you have the gas tank off, as you see, it's easily accessed. There's little clips on each side. We're going to pop those loose, cut this one piece of tape, and then we'll route our wiring. All right, so now we have a good, safe place to run our wiring. When we reinstall this, we don't have to worry about it ever chafing on the bottom of the gas tank or dropping down and touching the engine. I see a lot of installs where people want to try to lift the gas tank just enough that they poke a wire up here. As you see, this is not a hard process, much easier way of, or much better way of doing it, and it's just as easy as tucking it in beside the gas tank. All right, so on this bike, we're going to be running a 10 gauge power and ground. This is part of our EFX amp kit for Harleys. It has a waterproof fuse holder already covered in this nice covering here to keep our wires together, and they're both already cut to 6 feet to the same length. This is oxygen-free copper wire, not aluminum. You got to be really careful when you buy wire on the internet that you do not get aluminum wire. They'll call it copper-clad aluminum, and it will look just like copper, but it doesn't carry nearly enough current. So we're going to feed this right up with the factory wiring into behind the fairing. I'll wait and connect it to the battery at the end once we've had all of our connections made. We're going to set this right into this factory backbone compartment, they call it. Reassemble this cover. Now that that's back on, I'll go ahead and put our gas tank back on. That way we can get our fumes not coming out from these gas lines, and then we'll attach it to the amp. Now start all of these bolts before you tighten any of them. The back two are actually adjustable, so depending on where the tank ends up in the front, where those tighten down. You don't want to tighten them down and then have to loosen them again. Install these little covers back on the bolts on the front of the gas tank. Overfill your gas tank, this particular line can have gas come out of it. So you want to make sure you keep it secured inside and away from those exhausts. So at this point, we've pulled our 10 gauge power and ground wire up to our amplifier. Zip tied some of this factory harnessing, this T-harness we're using up into the fairing. On this bike, it has a factory Harley hidden antenna that's using the accessory port. So we're just going to connect our remote wire into the power that's feeding that. Just like you've seen me do on the other connections, we're going to use a non-insulated terminal, some heat shrink tubing. We'll get that connected so when our bike turns on, so will our amp. Shouldn't have any issues from any popping or interference by going with this connection. Slide your heat shrink tubing on over before you crimp, or you'll have to redo it. All right, so we've cut our power and ground wire down to length. We've crimped a non-insulated terminal, put some heat shrink tubing on it. We're going to crimp that to our amplifier, heat shrink it, wrap it with Tessa tape, and we'll be ready to roll. I've already connected our remote wire previously to our ignition turn on up here in the fairing. So after this, we'll be ready to start tuning our amps. All right, also, every time we do a Hertz HMP4D amp, we upgraded this fuse. It's a 15 amp fuse. I remove it, I put a 20 amp fuse in its place. If we're running a 2 ohm speaker, or if we're bridging the amp, we've seen them run between 18 to 19 amps of current, and at full volume we can blow a fuse. So to keep from getting back in here later, we're just going to go ahead and put a 20 amp fuse in it here. We also have a fuse on the other end of this wire within 6 inches of the battery. So if this ever shorts out or rubs on something, we're going to have that fuse blow instead of having a fire. All right, so our installation is almost complete. We're connected to our battery. I'm currently playing some test tones in the radio, and I've disconnected our front speakers. I've got a Y harness that I plug into the front speaker, and it allows me to connect to a meter. This is called a Distortion Detector. Part number DD1, Steve Mead Design makes this. This is the easiest and the best way we found to set an amplifier. So from previous experience, I know that when you turn this radio up till you have 4 of those little empty dots left, we have a clean signal. If I go higher than that, it distorts pretty much no matter what. So I've got my radio turned up all the way to the point that I only have 4 dots left, and I'm playing a negative 5 dB, 1 kilohertz track. What that's doing is it's giving me a solid tone that I can adjust my amp with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to watch this. As you see here, I've got a blue light on saying it sees my 1 kilohertz note, and I'm going to adjust my gains until I get a red distortion light, and then I'm going to turn it down slightly. So let's see how much we've got that we can go up before we get that. See that little red light flash? As soon as we see that light on, we got to quit turning it up. Let's see. There it is. See, it's on. We're going to back it up just slightly till that light goes back on. Now we have now set our amp where we're going to get the maximum power without distortion at that volume level on the radio. So in the future, Tall knows I can go to where I have 4 empty dots. I wish there was a number associated with the factory radio. Doesn't have that. And he knows that he can go all the way to that point and leave it there, and he doesn't have to worry about frying the amp, blowing the speaker. And we've got the maximum power. It's going to be a lot better. So we're done setting our amp. It was actually pretty simple, but I've done a little bit of work ahead of time. We had all of our files on a flash drive to plug in. This comes with a CD, so you will need to convert that over to a USB flash drive.
Go ahead.
Tall, we got you back together. How about we turn it on? Let's see what you think.
Okay, all right.
Let's see if it's louder than it was.
Let's see.
Wouldn't take much.
We'll try to get to the same song that we were on earlier.
I've got the mic going, so we'll see how loud it is.
Definitely a whole lot louder than what it was. I mean, that's super loud. I'll never have it played that loud, but man, it sounds good. That sounds really good.
So
guys, that's just from the 2 front speakers. We didn't do the 6x9. So those are just the 2 Hertz 6.5s. What model are they again?
These are the Hertz SX 165 Neo. So they're a coaxial, it's got a mid and a tweeter, Neo magnet, and they are so loud.
Yeah.
So I had our audio control RTA running, and we had it on SPO meter mode. Remember before, I think we were at 92.4, and you were talking about 97 back then?
Yeah.
119.6, so we've gained about 26, 27 dB for sure. By an amp upgrade, some speakers upgrade. Do you feel like it's missing anything? Any
No,
notes?
not at all. Not at all. The sound quality. First of all, guys, again, this is YouTube copyright-free music. This is not the music that I want to listen to. I'm just doing this to show you guys. But the speakers, they sound crystal clear and loud with no distortion at all. Sounds awesome. I can't wait. I won't even probably have this turned up halfway when I'm out riding the bike. Because, you know, with my Chromeworks exhaust, the bike is loud, but I think I'll have no problem at all listening to my radio as I'm on my ride. So great job, James. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for letting us do it.
All right, no problem. So, got all this done. Let's go get settled up.
Yes, sir. Let's get it taken care of.
All right, so guys, let me know. Should I do the 6x9s in the saddlebag lids? Let me know. Put it in the comments below. Jay kind of tried to talk me into it, and this is loud. It's way louder than I ever had, and way clearer than I ever even expected. Loud and clear. The 6x9s, I think, he says, they give me a little bit deeper bass.
We're going to get some more low end, we're going to get some more volume, and overall he's going to have more of the, what we call club sound. You're going to be surrounded by sound by putting them in the back.
Okay. Well guys, if you think it's something I should do, make sure that you put that in the comments below. I want to thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, have a blessed day.